Welcome back to the Left Library, the home of simplified political theory. If you're new here, we break down complex Marxist and political theory texts so everyone, from beginners to experts, can dive into the key ideas that shape our world. Today, we'll be exploring David Harvey's The New Imperialism, a vital text for understanding global capitalism and imperialism in the 21st century. David Harvey introduces the concept of new imperialism to explain how global power has shifted from direct colonial rule to more subtle forms of economic and political control. Harvey's argument is that the processes that once characterized colonialism, so resource extraction, political domination, are now executed through international trade agreements, financial institutions, and economic policies that disproportionately benefit the most powerful nations, particularly the United States. For Harvey, imperialism is not just a relic of the past, but a core feature of modern capitalism. He stresses that while military power and direct political control still exist, they often serve as backup mechanisms for ensuring the smooth functioning of global capital flows. One of Harvey's key contributions in The New Imperialism is the concept of accumulation by dispossession. This process builds on Marx's idea of primitive accumulation, which is the initial theft of land and resources that allowed capitalism to develop. Harvey argues that similar processes are happening today, but in new forms. These include privatization, financialization, and the commodification of public assets, like water, healthcare, and education. For instance, when public goods are sold to private companies, or when housing markets collapse, capital is transferred from the public, or the poor, into the hands of wealthy investors. As Harvey explains, start quote, "The corporatization, commodification, and privatization of hitherto public assets have been a signal feature of what I shall call accumulation by dispossession," page 148, end quote. In The New Imperialism, Harvey highlights how the state plays a central role in facilitating global capitalism. Unlike in the colonial era, where direct military conquest and control were primary tools of imperialism, today's imperialism is largely driven by economic and financial mechanisms. However, the state still acts as a crucial enforcer of capitalist interests, often using military intervention when and where necessary. For example, Harvey discusses the 2003 US invasion of Iraq as a prime example of this. While it was presented as a mission to bring democracy, it was also about securing control over oil resources and maintaining US economic dominance in the region. Harvey writes, start quote, "The US could not afford to lose control over Gulf oil, nor tolerate an alternative, anti-imperialist, state-oriented direction of development in Iraq," end quote. Next, Harvey introduces the concept of spatial fix to explain how capitalism continually resolves its own crises by expanding geographically. When markets in one region become too saturated, or there's too much capital accumulating without profitable outlets, capitalism pushes beyond its own borders, seeking new territories to exploit. This spatial expansion includes outsourcing labour, establishing factories in countries with cheaper wages, and exploiting natural resources, usually in the global south. While this expansion may temporarily solve the problem of overaccumulation, it creates new issues, such as rising inequalities between countries and ecological degradation. For example, in the late 20th century, multinational corporations moved much of their manufacturing to the global south, where labour was a lot cheaper, allowing them to continue profiting despite stagnation in their home countries. Next, Harvey looks at overaccumulation and crises. Capitalism, according to Harvey, tends toward overaccumulation. This occurs when wealth and capital become concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, with not enough opportunities to reinvest that capital profitably. This leads to economic crises, which are recurring features of the system. In response to these crises, states often intervene by transferring public assets into private hands, a process closely linked to accumulation by dispossession. For Harvey, these crises are not anomalies, but inherent to the logic of capitalism. Harvey concludes the New Imperialism by reflecting on how these processes of dispossession and exploitation are not only creating widespread inequality, but also fueling global resistance movements. From anti-globalization protests to environmental movements, people are resisting the forces of neoliberalism and imperialism. Harvey urges us to imagine alternatives to the current system, emphasizing the need for new forms of solidarity and collective ownership. As he writes, the new imperialism is driven by capitalist logic, but we must also be driven by the logic of resistance, solidarity, and social justice. This book is essential reading for anyone trying to understand how global capitalism works today and how we might fight back against it. Thank you again for watching The Left Library, the home of simplified political theory. If you found this video helpful, please do give us a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into political theory texts. Until next time, in solidarity.